Welcome, my dear guests, to the captivating expanses of my story.
Icy winds howled around the massive stone pillars of the Kazakh Senate building. The gas giant's reddish light filtered through the enormous panoramic windows of the dome, blending with the bluish glow of the plasma lights to form an unreal vibe. Heavy raindrops pattered against the energy dome above the city and burst into a firework of sparks. Paulina Romero stood at the lectern, her gray hair tightly tied back. Her knuckles stood out white as she gripped the edge of the lectern. The holographic projection of an Almoran cruiser rotated above the Senate chamber. 3 more border violations in the last week. The advances are becoming more aggressive, more coordinated. Her voice echoed off the high walls. Our patrols have had to fire warning shots to force them to turn back. A murmur went through the ranks of the senators. Elena Petrov leaned forward in her seat, her eyes narrowed to slits. "What exactly do you mean by coordinated, Admiral?" Or activated a new projection. Red lines ran like cobwebs through the border sector. The advances follow a pattern. They systematically test our reaction times, our tactics. She pointed to several flashing dots. Here and here, our patrols were involved in mock battles while other ships tried to break through. Marcus Vrot rose from his seat, his massive figure casting a shadow on the surrounding seats. And we can't stick to this closed border policy forever. The Almorans are an expanding species. It's in their nature. Their nature. Romero's voice dripped with sarcasm. Should we give up our sovereignty because it's in their nature? A rumble of thunder shook the dome. The purple light flickered as a massive lightning bolt flashed through the energy barrier. The question is not if, but when they will come with real military might, Romero continued. These advances are just tests. They're gathering information, analyzing our weak point. Myra Gupta tapped her long fingernails thoughtfully on the armrest of her seat. Do we have any intelligence on troop movements in their space? Are they concentrating forces? Romero nodded grimly. Our long-range sensors show increased activity in 3 systems along the border. They're increasing their presence, systematically and methodically. The hologram switched to an image of the Wayaliti system. The crystalline structures of the Almoran outpost jutted out of the surface of a small moon-like massive stalagmites, and mining facilities crisscrossed the surface like gaping wounds. The outpost was built in less than 2 months. Romero zoomed in on one of the structures. The efficiency of their mining operations exceeds our estimates by a factor of 3. The projection switched to a system beyond Bobo. Above the senators' heads, an Earth-like planet with emerald oceans appeared. The images showed massive Almoran spaceships hovering above a city of curved, organic-looking structures. Elena Petrov leaned forward, her fingers tightening around the armrest of her seat. A pre-FDI session, the Saurian race native to the world of Gerth.AI. Romero's tone took on a sharp edge. A hitherto non-violent race that has just taken its first steps into the cosmic era. The following images made several senators flint. Crystalline Almoran battle machines marched through the city's streets, their mineral bodies gleaming in the light of burning buildings. The Saurian inhabitants were rounded up, their scaly bodies trembling with fear. They've taken over the entire infrastructure. Romero scrolled through more footage. Within days, the main cities were occupied, the government overthrown. The spy probe also recorded scenes of the systematic purges. Almoran soldiers drove groups of Saurians into improvised camps, and crystalline blades pierced those who resisted. Myra Gupta pressed a hand to her mouth. These are not military targets. Genocide. Romero finished the sentence. The Almorans don't see other species as equals. To them, we're just obstacles to... The last images showed huge mining facilities being dug out of the fertile ground. Where the magnificent cities of the Saurians once stood, crystalline structures of the Almorans now rose. The few surviving natives toiled in the mines under the supervision of their new masters. This is their modus operandi. Romero let the projection go out. They expand, subjugate, assimilate. And now they're on our borders. The heavy crystal chandeliers on the vaulted ceiling of the Senate chamber cast a cold light on the senators' worried faces. Sevia Heimber rose from her raised chair. The rustling of her imperial robes echoed through the sudden silence, her piercing blue eyes fixed on Paulina Romero, Admiral Romero. Her voice cut through the tense atmosphere. You have presented the evidence of the Almoran incursions. What solution do you propose? Paulina Romero took a step forward. Her gray hair shone in the light of the crystal chandeliers as she straightened up, and the insignia of her admiral's uniform sparkled. Impreatrix. Romero's voice echoed firmly through. The sources of the Empire present us with a clear opportunity. The Pegasus flotilla must be drastically expanded. A murmur went through the ranks of the senators. Romero activated the hologram in the middle of the hall, with blue lights formed into the familiar silhouettes of the 7 corvettes. Our current flotilla is excellently trained and equipped, but 7 ships are not enough to protect our expanding borders. The accord changed. More corvettes appeared until 20 ships hovered in perfect formation. I propose expanding the flotilla to 20 corvettes. With this strength, we can conduct multiple patrols simultaneously and ensure rapid response capability in all border sectors. Elena Petrov rose from her seat. The cost of 13 new corvettes would be astronomical. Where would these resources come from? From the unused mining rights in the Ladon system. Romero countered hesitantly. The postponed expansion allows us to divert these resources. Marcus Vogt shook his head. The Ladon system was not developed for a reason. The anomalies there. The anomalies are exactly why we need a stronger fleet, Romero interrupted. You don't know what's out there. The Almorans are expanding aggressively. Unknown ships are attacking our research missions. The Empire needs a fleet that can cope with this threat. The holographic corvettes rotated slowly in the hall center as the senators debated the implications of Romero's proposal. Sevia watched the debate with an impenetrable expression, her fingers drumming lightly on the arm of her chair. Myra Gupta rose from her seat. Her colorful clothing contrasted sharply with the dark robes of the other senators. The hem of her robe brushed against the polished marble floor as she stepped forward. Paulina's proposal has merit. Her warm voice echoed through the hall. We cannot turn a blind eye to the Almoran threat, but the funding doesn't have to come from the state budget alone. She turned to Sevia, and the Impreatrix tilted her head slightly, a sign to continue speaking. Astroman Industries has already shown interest in the Ladin system. Olga Petrov and I have had successful negotiations in the past. Myra activated her datapad. Projections of resource maps of the Ladin system appeared next to the rotating corvettes. We could trade limited mining rights in the outer system for fleet expansion support. Elena Petrov folded her arms. My cousin will not agree to this without considerable consideration. Of course not. Myra scrolled through the maps. But the asteroid belts in the Ladon system are rich in rare earths. Astromine could set up mining stations there, under strict imperial supervision and with the protection of the expanded fleet. The projections now showed detailed scans of the asteroid fields, and mirror deposits lit up in different colors. A 10-year contract. Myra marked specific regions. Astroman receives exclusive rights in these sectors in return for materials and resources, for fleet expansion worth 30% of the expected mining volume. Paulina Romero stepped next to the projection. The supply of strategic materials would be secured, and Astromine's mining operations would need military protection anyway. A symbiosis, Myra agreed. Iris, the Empire gets its fleet. Astromine gets profitable mining rights. Both sides benefit from increased security in the sector. With your permission, Impreatrix, I would begin direct negotiations with Olga Petrov. My conversations with her so far led me to believe she would be open to such an arrangement. The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows on the faces of those present as they waited for Sevia's response. The holographic projections of corvettes and asteroid fields merged into a complex ballet of light and shadow above their heads. Cool air flowed through the massive pillars of the plenary chamber, while the subdued light of the evening sun fell through the high-leaded glass windows and cast a mosaic of shadows on the polished marble floor. A smell of heavy wood and old leather hung in the air. The senators had gathered in their raised boxes, their robes gleaming in the traditional colors of their factions. Sevia Heimber stood at the podium, her slender figure looking almost fragile against the massive dark stone, but her piercing blue eyes swept over the assembly with unwavering authority. She tightly tied her long dark brown hair, and her magnificent imperial robes shone dully in the subdued light. The vote on the motion to expand the Pegasus flotilla is open. Her clear voice echoed through the hall. Holographic voting terminals in front of the senators came to life. A murmur went through the ranks of the citizens' elite union. Marcus Vogt leaned forward in his box, his fingers drumming nervously on the polished wooden balustrade. "The costs are astronomical. We can't afford to waste resources while our colonies are starving." "Resources?" Elena Petrov, of the One Throne faction, stood up with a jerk. Her voice quivered with suppressed anger. "The images from Gerth-II show us what the Almorans are doing to subjugated peoples. The Saurians are being systematically exterminated. The holographic images of the burning cities on Gerth. I flickered across the displays again. An agonized silence spread through the hall as the senators looked at the images of burnt temples and destroyed cultural sites. Thus, the conclave of the august clergy votes in favor of expansion, announced Sister Nadine Heimber. Her otherwise stern face was marked by disgust. Anyone who remains silent in the face of such atrocities is complicit. Just the voting terminals lit up. Even the otherwise war-critical Homo sapiens dominance faction voted unanimously in favor. The holograms showed the final result. 87% in favor. Sevia nodded slowly. The motion had passed, but the price was high. The images of the genocide had united the Senate, but the underlying conflicts continued to smolder. She sensed the restrained anger of the factions who felt compelled to agree. This forced unity would come at a price. The heavy air in the plenary chamber vibrated from the senators' restrained conversations as Sevia Heimber strode from the podium to her raised throne chair. The rustling of her imperial robes mingled with the factions' hushed murmurs. Admiral Romero. Her voice cut through the hall like a laser through steel. Paulina Romero straightened up in her military box, her golden rank insignia gleaming in the setting sun's light. "You have 24 hours to present the specifications for the new corvettes. I expect a detailed schedule for construction and commissioning." Romero inclined his head curtly. "Really, the plans are already available, Impreatrix. The shipyards in the scifinovel system can begin construction within 3 months." Sevia turned to Elena Petrov, who stood tensely in her senator's box. "The Finance Committee will make the necessary funds available immediately. No delays due to bureaucratic hurdles. This will have a massive impact on the budget planning for the next few years." Petrov's voice sounded fast. "I will sign the release today." Myra Gupta, Saya fixed the governor of the Citizen Elite Union. "Your faction will lead the negotiations with the Stroman Industries regarding mining rights in the Ladon system. Make sure the corporations do their part to Gupta stroked her silk robe. "The first round of negotiations is scheduled for tomorrow. Olga Petrov has already signaled her interest." Rita Griffin. Sevia's gaze traveled to the chairwoman of Homo sapiens dominance. "Your research facilities will handle the tactical analysis of Almoran combat technology. I want to know how they fight and where their weak points are." Griffin nodded grimly, her angular features hardening. "My teams have already begun analyzing the combat records from Gerth-II. Sevia rose from her throne, her slender figure towering over the stone podium. "The time for deliberation is over. Now it is time to act." She swept her gaze over the assembled senators. "The Empire would not stand idly by while another people is wiped out. The Pegasus flotilla will be our response to Almoran aggression. The dim evening sun bathed the chamber in blood-red light as the senators rose. The heavy scent of incense hung in the air, mingling with the weight of the decisions made. The heavy scent of jasmine tea permeated Myra Gupta's office as she gazed through the high windows at the shimmering towers of Kasach. Dust particles danced in the setting sun's light, which refracted off the mirrored facades of the surrounding buildings. Her gaze slid over the worn wooden panels on the walls, contrasting with the ultra-modern holo-displays that framed her massive desk. With practiced movements, Myra activated the quantum communication unit. The low hum of the cooling units mingled with the muffled street noise that filtered through the insulation. Her round fingers glided over the holographic keyboard as she established the connection to the Susquehanna. The hologram of Captain Lena Jules flickered before her, surrounded by the characteristic blue interference patterns of quantum transmission. Lena wore her uniform precisely, her dark hair tied back tight. Governor Gupta. Lena's voice sounded clear despite the vast distance between them. Myra reached for her colorful teacup, a deliberate contrast to the sterile surroundings of the spaceship. Captain Schulz, I hope I'm not interrupting too much. The Senate expects a progress report on the development of the 34 CT system. Where development is proceeding, Lena paused, her jaw muscles tensing briefly. More complex than expected. The habitable moon shows promising terraforming potential, but the gravitational conditions of the gas giant make it difficult to install the atmosphere processes. Myra took a sip of tea as she studied the subtle nuances in Lena's expression. I see. What about the resource supplies? We've mapped 3 promising asteroid fields. Lena activated a 3-dimensional represented markers lit up between the projected celestial bodies. But I'm worried about the unstable hyperlane connections to Scafo. The energy fluctuations have tripled in the last few weeks. That sounds worrying. Myra put down her cup and leaned forward. The wooden floorboards under her chair creaked softly. Do you have an explanation for these anomalies? A shadow flitted across Lena's face. Not yet. Dr. Chen suspects a connection with the increased solar activity of the F-star. We've deployed additional sensor beacons to monitor the fluctuations. Lena Schulz's face brightened. She tightened her posture, a military precision in every movement. Belarus is providing excellent support for exploration. Their experience with heavy gravity zones is paying off. Her fingers moved over invisible controls, and the system image zoomed in on the habitable moon. Ecosphere Solutions' new atmosphere processors are operating at 87% efficiency, well above projected values. Your staff has proven to be extremely competent. Myra nodded as she studied the projections. The bluish light from the holograms cast dancing shadows on the wood paneling of her office. The smell of jasmine tea mingled with the metallic ozone of quantum communication. The progress is impressive, Captain. She rose from her chair, the heavy floorboards groaning under her footsteps. Her colorful clothing contrasted with the somber wood panels as she walked around the desk. I suggest we optimize our resources. The Belarus has proven how effectively it can tap into the 34 CT system. Her hand slid over the polished edges of her desk. Let's leave the rest of the work here to them. Meanwhile, the Susquehanna could explore the Loan-Yundi system. The 3 asteroid belts there offer enormous potential for the Empire. Lena's hologram flickered as she shifted position. The image of the 34 CT system disappeared, replaced by the reddish projection of the Loan-Yundi system. An interesting proposition, Governor. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she analyzed the data. The asteroid belts between Loan-Yundi and Ive show promising mineral deposits. Myra returned to her chair and picked up her teacup. The steam curled in the cool draft of the air conditioning. The position between the hyperlanes to Polaris and Ladon makes the system strategically valuable. Ostromine has already signaled interest in mining rights. With the improved mining equipment, we could deliver initial results quickly. Lena projected detailed scans of the asteroid belts. Red markers pulsed in particularly mineral-rich areas. The Susquehanna is optimally equipped for such operations. The hologram of Lena Schultz flickered one last time, before dissolving in a swirl of blue light particles. Myra Gupta rubbed her temples and leaned back in her ergonomic office chair. The evening sun of Kasach cast long shadows through the high windows of her office in the government tower, while the metropolis below her was transformed into a sea of sparkling lights. The smell of green tea filled her nose. Her half-full cup on her desk was still steaming, a gift from the tea ceremony master from Neo-Kyoto. Myra reached for it and took a cautious sip. The warm liquid helped her to organize her thoughts. Her data pad hummed quietly as it processed the latest economic reports from Astromine Industries. Olga Petrov's company had posted impressive profits in recent quarters, mainly through aggressive expansion in frontier systems. Myra scrolled through the figures, her knuckles white from gripping the pad tightly. The air-conditioned air in the office suddenly felt too cool. Myra stood up and stepped to the window. Below her stretched the Imperial Government District, with its characteristic crystal towers and floating gardens. A swarm of transport gliders passed between the buildings like a school of fish. Computer, activate privacy mode. The windows immediately darkened to an opaque black. Myra began to walk up and down the room, her practical shoes barely making a sound on the high-quality synthetic wood. Olga would try to take advantage of the situation, she muttered. The CEO of Astronomine was known for her aggressive negotiating tactics. She'll want to use the fleet expansion as leverage. Myra stopped in front of a holographic map of the border. Red markings showed the position of the Almoran forces, and blue was the position of the Imperial fleet. The balance of power was disturbingly unbalanced. She adjusted her office robe, a gift from her grandmother made of hand-woven silk from the heavy fabric gave her a sense of authority that she desperately needed right now. With practiced movements, she tied her gray hair into a tight knot. Computer, the current position of Olga Petrov. Shira Petrov is approaching the government tower. Estimated arrival in 7 minutes. Myra nodded. She needed Astronomine's support for the fleet expansion of the Pegasus flotilla, but at what cost? The mining rights in the Ladon system were tempting for any corporation. But Olga Petrov was not known for her reticence in exploiting new worlds. The world and evening sun was reflected in the polished exterior of the hovering limousine. As Olga Petrov gazed through the tinted windows at the passing skyline of Kasach, the subtle scent of genuine leather mingled with the aroma of her third esprit. Quiet whirring of the anti-grav engines was barely perceptible. Her slender fingers drummed on the datapad in her lap. The encrypted messages from her contacts in the Senate had already paid off. Every detail about the planned fleet expansion was in front of her, from the technical specifications to the budget calculations. Computer, current stock prices from quantum dynamics, she ordered. Holographic diagrams filled the space in front of her. Gray competitors' shares had shown a stable upward trend since the secret meeting with Marcus Eisenberg. A smile flitted across her angular features. The hidden sensors in the Le Croix restaurant had recorded every word of her agreement with Eisenberg. As soon as the Senate gave its approval, the cooperation would give both corporations access to the resources of the Ladon system. The limousine glided between the crystalline towers. Olga sipped Neo espresso and savored the intense aroma. Rice, beans from the plantations on Nova Terra were a small luxury she allowed herself. An incoming call from Dr. Samira Al-Fad, the board system reported, except the hologram of her killer appeared in front of her. The analysis of the fleet data is complete, Samira reported. Her dark eyes sparkled with the anomalies in the Ladon system exceed our wildest expectations, especially the crystalline structures in the asteroid belt. Later, Olga interrupted her gently. Prepare the presentation for the Board of Governors. I want everyone to understand the potential we can unlock there. The hologram faded. Olga looked at the approaching outline of the government tower. Its curved architecture rose into the evening sky like a DNA helix. Myra Gupta, the pragmatic governor with her penchant for colorful clothing, would already. The limousine began its approach. Olga checked her appearance on the reflective surface of the window. Her tailored business suit fitted perfectly, and her silver-gray hair was tied back tightly. She would make Myra an offer that the governor's negotiation room, on the 12th floor of the government tower, offered a breathtaking view of the Kazakh skyline. The reddish light of the setting sun fell through the tinted panoramic windows and bathed the minimalist furnished room in warm shadows. Myra Gupta gazed at the passing skyscrapers while she waited for Olga Petrov. The gentle hum of the air conditioning mingled with the muffled noise of the traffic far below her. The soft hiss of the opening door announced the arrival of Astromine Industries' ECO, Olga Petrov. She strode in with the confident bearing of a woman used to closing billion-dollar deals. Her tailored anthracite suit emphasized her imposing presence. Governor Gupta, Petrov's voice sounded warm but firm. An interesting time for negotiations, with tensions with the Almorans rising. Myra pointed to one of the ergonomic chairs at the conference table, which was made of real cherry wood. That's exactly why we're here, Olga. Have a seat. Holographic displays flickered between them, projecting detailed maps of the Wayaliti and Laden systems. The floating displays cast bluish reflections on their faces. You know that the Senate has decided to expand the Myra began, activating the resource overview of the asteroid belts with a wave of her hand. 13 more corvettes will require significant resources that Astromine could supply. A subtle smile played around Petrov's lips, and in return we get exclusive mining rights in both systems. Not exclusive. Myra slid a data crystal across the table, but preferential. 50% of the mining rights are in the outer asteroid belt of Wayaliti, and 30% are in the Ladon system. Petrov took the crystal, turning it thoughtfully between her fingers. The red warning symbols of the unstable hyperlanes in the Wayaliti system were reflected in it. The development costs are high. The route to Ladon is dangerous. That's why we're offering support from the Imperial fleet. The Ekbelarus will secure the region. Myra projected the planned patrol routes. You will also have priority access to all geological data from the exploration ships. Interesting. Petrov leaned forward, her dark eyes fixed on Myra. But not enough. The Helix will object to too much private influence. Nadine Heimber is already making a case against corporate cooperation. Their shuttle glider passed outside and briefly cast its shadow into the room. Myra activated further projections, which now showed both systems' strategic raw material deposits. The Helix has other concerns. Genetic purity concerns them more than mining rights. Myra looked at the floating holograms of the raw material deposits and felt her stomach tighten. Olga Petrov's confident smile revealed that the CEO knew precisely what cards she held. The government needed these resources more urgently than Astromine needed new mining rights. 60% in the outer belt of Wayaliti. Myra corrected her previous statement. Sweat formed on her forehead as the reddish evening sun fell through the windows. Petrov shook his head slowly. Too little. We assume the full development costs and risks. Her fingers tapped a precise rhythm on the polished tabletop. 80% in Wayaliti, 50% in Ladon, plus preferential treatment for all future exploration in both sectors. The muffled hiss of the air conditioning filled the tense silence. Myra activated new projections and cost estimates for the fleet upgrade flickering between them. And 70% in Wayaliti, 40% in Ladon. In exchange, you guarantee resource deliveries for all 13 corvettes within 18 months. 24 months, Petrov countered. The hyperlanes are unstable. Myra rubbed her temples. Without this agreement, the fleet expansion would be delayed for years. Agreed. But we expect monthly progress reports and a say in development planning. Quarterly progress reports, Petrov replied and leaned forward. The right to have a say is limited to safety issues. Operational planning remains with Astromin. The governor stared at the rotating holograms of the asteroid belts. Both sides would hate these conditions. The Senate would criticize the high concessions, while Astromine's shareholders would grumble about the strict conditions. All right, Myra finally sighed. She projected the draft contract between them. Let's work out the details. Petrov nodded curtly and pulled out her own data crystal. My lawyers have already prepared a draft. They spent the next 2 hours discussing every clause and wording, while outside the sun sank behind the skyscrapers, and the office towers of Xanadu began to glow in the twilight. Myra Gupta rose from the metallic conference table in the negotiation room on the 12th floor. The setting Kazakh sun cast its last rays through the panoramic windows and bathed the minimalist room in a copper-colored twilight. Holographic displays were still projecting the last details of the contract into the air-conditioned air. The contracts will be ready for signing tomorrow, Myra said, stroking her colorful robe. Sitting for hours on the ergonomic chairs had tense her muscles. Elena Petrov nodded curtly as she stowed her data pads in a slim briefcase. Astromin will meet the agreed deadlines. You can expect the first resource deliveries for the corvettes in 6 months. The low hum of the air conditioning mingled with the muffled roar of traffic hundreds of meters below them. Myra deactivated the floating holograms with a wave of her hand, and the room became noticeably darker. Petrov. The door to the negotiation room closed with a resounding click. Olga Petrov's heels clicked across the corridor to place in her private hover limousine. The CEO of Astromin leaned back in the ergonomic seat. A satisfied smile played around her lips as the autopilot AI steered the limousine through the dusk. The lights of the megacity below her merged into glow. Petrov activated the holo display of her neural link, connecting to Dr. Marcus Eisenberg, quantum dynamics. The projection system flickered to life. Eisenberg's gaunt face materialized before her, framed by holographic Olga. What a pleasant surprise. His voice sounded muffled through the quantum encryption. The negotiations were successful, Marcus. Olga leaned forward as her shuttle glided between the skyscrapers. 70% of the mining rights in Luanyundi, 40 in Ladon. The Senate was generous. Excellent. Eisenberg folded his hands under his chin. The bluish light from the holograms made his features appear even sharp. Quantum dynamics is ready. Our research vessels can be on site within 3 weeks. The anomalies in the Ladon system are a top priority, Olga replied. She saw the first stars appear in the darkening sky through the tinted windows. We should discuss our special arrangement. The hovering limousine glided between the gigantic skyscrapers of Xanadu. Under the tinted dome of the passenger compartment, Olga Petrov observed the pulsating life of the megacity. Neon signs and holograms cast dazzling light on the mirrored facades of the skyscrapers, while endless streams of aircraft snaked through the narrow flight corridors between the buildings. The autopilot AI navigated the limousine smoothly through the dense traffic. Red brake lights from gliders and shuttles were reflected in the cockpit's chrome trim. The low hum of the repulsor engines muffled through the windows. In the twilight of the setting sun, the towers of the government quarter rose like dark monoliths in the purple sky. Their tops disappeared into the low-hanging clouds, which were bathed in copper-colored light from the red giant. The limousine passed the enormous Astromine Tower, whose curved shape spiraled upwards like a DNA helix. Olga gazed at the pulsating logo of her company, which hovered 100 stories up. The blue letters cast their cold light on the surrounding facades. The expressway took the limousine over the older districts of the city. Below her stretched a sea of weathered metal roofs and rusty industrial plants. Steam rose from countless smokestacks, mingling with the perpetual smog over the city's lower levels. The hover limousine accelerated as it reached the outskirts. The dense buildings gave way to sprawling housing estates under huge air-conditioned domes. The reddish light of the evening sun shimmered through the transparent domes. The outline of the New Berlin spaceport could already be seen in the distance. Huge cargo ships hung over the landing platforms like inert insects, while smaller shuttles maneuvered between them like beacons. The position lights of the ships taking off and landing drew complex patterns in the darkness. The autopilot AI corrected course to avoid the formation of military gliders. Their matte black hulls almost merged with the darkening sky, and only the glowing red engine ports gave away their position. Olga leaned back in her seat and watched through the tinted windows as the last rays of sunlight slid along the city's domes. The red giant slowly sank behind the horizon, bathing the clouds in a deep purple.
Hey, I would be happy if you could give my video a like. Leave a comment and subscribe to my